US President Donald Trump has said that he would meet with President Vladimir Putin of Russia on Friday in Alaska. Trump has been trying desperately to secure a deal to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, which has been going on for over 3 years now. Trump announced the meeting last week, shortly after he suggested that a peace deal between Moscow and Kiev could include some swapping of territories. This was the clearest signal yet that the United States may join Russia in trying to compel Ukraine to permanently concede some of its land.
But I'll be meeting very shortly with President Putin. It would have been sooner, but I guess there's security arrangements that unfortunately people have to make. Otherwise, I'd do it much quicker. He would too. He'd like to meet as soon as possible. I agree with it.
After months of trying to get Putin to end the war, Trump had grown tired of the multiple phone calls with Putin. He had also started to issue ultimatums. Trump and Putin had about half a dozen phone calls in the last 6 months. Even worse for Putin, Trump appears to have patched up his sour relationship with President Zelensky of Ukraine. That is despite a famous, or rather infamous, Oval Office bust-up that happened earlier this year, which at that time was welcomed by the Kremlin.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
It was not clear yet that Trump would be able to or willing to follow through on the threats that he had made to put punishing tariffs on those countries that buy Russian oil, including India and China. Last week, he imposed an additional 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil, but shied away from imposing the same for China. But Trump's deadline for Putin to end the war was swiftly approaching. It was initially supposed to be 50 days, that would end sometime in September. That was then reduced to just a couple of weeks. The meeting between Putin and Trump would be the first in-person summit between an American and a Russian president since former US President Joe Biden met with Vladimir Putin in June of 2021. It'll also be the first in-person meeting between Trump and Putin since 2017, when they met in Helsinki on the sidelines of a summit. This meeting reflects Trump's confidence in his ability to persuade Putin in a face-to-face encounter to stop the war. That is a goal that has eluded Trump ever since he returned to office 6 months ago. For Putin, the meeting with Trump itself is a victory, after he spent the past several months largely isolated from the international community, particularly the international community in NATO and also in Europe. Despite previous refusals by Russian officials to negotiate over territory in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the Russian president, during a meeting at the Kremlin last week, along with Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, he gave the impression that Russia was now willing to engage in some swapping of land, in some sort of land deal-making. Land swapping is something that Trump is an expert in, given his past as a real estate mogul. By speaking a language that Trump understands, the language of real estate, Putin has secured something he had been speaking of ever since January, which is a one-on-one meeting with Trump without the presence of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Putin feels that this will be the ideal platform for him to make a case and to cut a deal with Trump.
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
At the same time, tensions between Washington and Kiev have reappeared. Zelensky said on Saturday that the Ukrainian constitution does not allow Kiev to negotiate away the country's land. Trump told European officials that the meeting with Putin would be followed by a three-way summit with both Putin and Zelensky. But Putin is loath to meeting Zelensky either in a trilateral arrangement with Trump or in a bilateral direct meeting. But the Kremlin quickly said that no such promise of a trilateral meeting shepherded by Trump or the Americans has been made by the Russian side. The White House proceeded anyway to go ahead and announce that first meeting will be between Trump and Putin, and if they agree to a consensus, if some kind of a ceasefire can be announced, then there will be a separate meeting which involves all three leaders.
Звісно, ми не дамо Росії нагород за зроблене. Український народ заслуговує на мир. Але всі партнери мають розуміти, що таке достойний мир. Цю війну треба закінчувати, і Росія має її закінчити. Росія її почала та затягує, не слухаючи ніякі дедлайни. І саме це проблема, а не щось інше. Відповідь на українське територіальне питання є вже в Конституції України. Відступати від цього ніхто не буде і не зможе.
The meeting also presents a host of challenges. Ukrainian leaders have adamantly opposed relinquishing any of their land to Russia. The country's constitution, in fact, explicitly bars any president, including President Zelensky, from conceding any territory to a third country. Putin, on the other hand, has made it clear that, among other things, he wants a formal promise that Ukraine will not enter NATO or any other Western military alliance. He also wants a written guarantee that Ukraine will never host any Western troops on its territory or be allowed to use a military buildup that threatens Russia's security and sovereignty. What this essentially means is it will make Kiev perpetually vulnerable to yet another Russian attack. The fundamental thing for Russia is military domination. Putin understands that Trump is willing to offer things that few other American leaders would even consider, which could help Russia fracture the divide between Ukraine and the Western alliance. Putin will not stop the war for the sake of the Europeans, even if getting them means agreeing to a sovereign Ukraine which has a strong military and a military that's aligned with the West. The two leaders would come into the summit with different goals. Trump's goal would be to put an end to the war. Putin's would be a strategic repositioning of Russia. Russian officials have demanded that Ukraine concede the 4 regions that Moscow has claimed to have annexed from the eastern part of Ukraine in late 2022. That includes the entire Donbas region in the eastern part of Ukraine, which Russia has taken over since its invasion. In return, it is possible that Russia offers some parts of the south, including parts outside Kherson and Zaporizhia, which hosts the largest nuclear reactor in that part of the world, to the Ukrainians in return for Putin and Moscow taking complete control of the eastern parts, which are known as the Donbas.